G'day and welcome back to another episode of Tomo's Tune-Ups. On this episode, we're going to be reassembling the 850 gearbox out of this little beast behind me. We're going to go through what I found, what was wrong, and how to identify it. Alright, so we're going to be going through a couple of things today that I found and real good handy tips and hints and things to look for with the gearbox. Now, like I originally said when we started this blue beast behind me, that the customer said that once they put it in gear and they went to drive off, it was jumping out of gear straight away. Now, most cars nowadays run a detent. Now, the detent enables it to stay in gear, or in our case, through further inspection, I found that the detent spring and bearing actually holds it in the neutral position. So between two gears. So in our case, between first and second or third and fourth. Now, depending how many gears you have in a gearbox, you will have obviously more detents depending on the amount of gears that you have in a manual transmission. So with this one, I found that the detent spring and the bearing had actually worn, but it wasn't the sole contributing factor to the problem. Now, what I originally thought, which was the detent springs and bearings that sit inside the synchro hub, wasn't the sole underlying factor of why this car kept jumping out of gear. So it's only through further inspection that I'd found this, and through research along with chatting with a couple of mates. So this gear here is the first gear ring. So as you can see here, this is a straight cut gear. This gearbox on an 850, because it was the first generated gearbox for the Mini, which then went on to increase to a 4 synchro gearbox, this car only came out with a 3 synchro gear. So meaning first gear has no synchro whatsoever. So because the gears are straight cut in first, a lot of the time you'll find that when you go to engage the gear, it will just simply grind. So as you can see here, the back of the edge is quite straight, which is exactly what it needs to be. On the front edge, so the leading edge and where the gear engages, it's starting to round off quite badly. So you can actually see with the light there, all of these shiny spots along here. So what we found was that the case hardening has worn off quite significantly. Now, case hardening prevents the gear from touching metal to metal and wearing it prematurely. So having two hardened surfaces touching each other, it's going to prolong the life of the gear. So as you can see here, it is a bit of a rounded edge. Once I get the new one, I'll show you guys in a picture down below what it looks like. So it is started to round off. Now it needs to be in the shape of a V, so V for Victor. Also, because this is rounded off so much, it is not going to be engaging properly. Also, if you look quite closely, I'll also post another photo down below, that the gears aren't completely straight. Some of them are on a bit of an angle, so they're leading towards this way. So instead of being parallel up and down, you'll find that the gear has a slight kick to it. So because of this, once it's engaged and it is spinning with the rotation of the engine once the car is moving, it'll find that once it's engaged and it starts moving, it is then just naturally wanting to push itself apart because the gears are worn on such a helical angle. Now, going back to what I've said before, these gears here, so this gear here is called a helical cut gear because it is cut on an angle. This one here, on the other hand, is a straight cut gear. So helical cut gears are really good because they keep the noise down of the gearbox and they don't make a loud whining sound. For those people driving manuals, whenever you put it in reverse, you hear that the gearbox whines. That's primarily because it is a straight cut gear. Straight cut are quite robust and a lot more heavy duty. So a lot of race cars use them, and you can actually upgrade your Mini to suit a full 4-speed straight cut gearbox. So this is what is making contact with this gear assembly, which is just this one down here, all the time. So whether you are in gear or whether it's in neutral, they're always making contact. So it just depends whether it's in gear as to whether torque is being applied through the gear, through to the specific gear that you've just chosen. So what's happening here is these two gears are interlocked like this, and that's how it's sitting. Now, because both gears, hopefully you can see that there, see how the gears are not completely straight, they start to taper off down at the ends. Because both gears are bent like that, as it's starting to turn, it's naturally wanting to push itself out. So what's happening is once the gears are engaging, because the gears are cut on a bit of an angle like this, but obviously the opposite way, it is naturally wanting to throw itself out. Same with the camber on the road. So if you drive directly in the middle of the road where the camber is, you will drive completely straight with your wheel alignment. Whereas if you drive on the left or the right hand side of the road, because of the camber of the road, which enables the water to run off and not build up in the middle, naturally the car wants to pull left or right depending what side of the road you drive on and what country. So that is our second problem. So the third problem that we have is the selector fork itself, which is this one here. So this is the brand new one. I'll just see if I can find the old ones. So this one here is for third and fourth. So where it sits inside the hub, I'll just pull this off. With a little bit of clearance issues at the end, I'll upload another photo down below so you guys can see. There is an alarming amount of gap between the end of the selector fork, which is this part here, to the selector hub right here. So what's happening is this is getting a little bit of movement in here. So once you apply your movement through here and you select your third or fourth gear, whichever gear you're going into, you will find that the 3 mil of gap, for instance, down here probably leads to about 30 mil at the gear stick. So you're having to push it even further to engage the gear. So because this is worn so badly, once the shaft is starting to move, it's not engaging the gear fully. So that's going to be contributing to the fact that the car's not staying in gear, nor is it engaging properly. So there are a couple of extra things I had to go out and purchase. So obviously one of them being a new first gear ring, a new Layshaft, gear assembly, the Layshaft that runs through the middle, and 2 new selector forks. So we're going to be installing those next, and then we're going to start the reassembly process. So if I grab the new one, if I put that down there, and I grab the new selector fork for first gear, even though we're still using the old gear, you've got barely any movement. All right, so this is your selector shaft itself. So this end goes towards the selector, so towards the end of this side of the gearbox, and this goes onto your synchro hub. So how it is removed is essentially, all you want to be doing is loosening off this lock nut right here, and then you're going to be unwinding the bolt. The easiest and best method you can do when removing it is to grab yourself a Sharpie or even just a permanent marker and just mark the end of it. That way you know when you go to put the new one on where to stop, and that way you can guide the bolt inside the shaft here. So if I just loosen that off and I move it to the side, you'll actually see that inside this shaft is a recessed hole. Now this bolt needs to line up with this hole just here. So if you get this wrong, the shaft will be moving independently, therefore it won't be selecting gear. So before you strip it, give it a clean, put a bit of whiteout on the end of the shaft or even just a Sharpie. That way you know exactly where you need to be when you go to tighten it up, and you don't get it wrong and then prevent further problems down the track of reassembly and finding that it's not going into a specific gear.